The forage budget is calculated using the forage supply and feed demand. Simply put, we subtract the need from the feed.
On one side of the equation, we have the pasture in the paddock. That's the feed that's available for stock. On the other side, we need to work out how much the need is, so how much stock need to take out of the paddock. In a forage budget, we subtract the need from the feed and we work out whether there's going to be sufficient feed left for stock in a paddock. So the components of a forage budget are firstly the total yield, how much pasture there is in the paddock at the end of the growing season. The second thing is how much we want left at the end of our grazing period, which could be at Christmas time or even into January. So that's called the residual pasture. The third thing we need to know about is the unpalatable pasture that is in our total yield, the component of that pasture that stock are not going to eat. So that's the unpalatable. And the fourth thing we need to work out is how much detachment is going to occur over that grazing period. So by detachment, I mean what falls off the plants naturally and what's also trampled or lost through the action of wind. So that's detachment. And what we do is take total yield, subtract the residual, subtract the unpalatable, the detachment, and what's left is the pasture available for stock to graze. Now the other side of the equation too, when we're trying to take into account how much forage is being eaten out of the paddock, we need to look at all the grazing stock in a paddock as well. So that includes kangaroos, and there's about 14 kangaroos to the adult equivalent. Goats, we need to take them into account as well. So for all these grazing stock, we need to take that into account in a forage budget. So if you have a high population of roos, get a bit of a handle on how many roos you reckon are in a paddock and add them to the adult equivalents table as well. Horses are about 1.2 to 1.5 adult equivalents, and any other stock that you might have, take them into account as well. Of course, if we get a frost, that's going to change the whole equation. So we're now going to do some calculations and calculate a forage budget for a particular paddock. Now this paddock happens to be 200 hectares, and we've been out in that paddock and had a look at the pasture out there, estimated what the yield is. We've actually done some cuts and weighed those and worked out around about 3,000 kilograms per hectare of dry matter of pasture in that paddock. And our grazing period is going to be from the 1st of June this year until about the middle of December 2012. So that comes to, let's say, for example, about 200 days. So when we were out in the paddock, we had a look at the unpalatable, and there was some old grey material on the standing plants. So that material was grown 2 seasons ago and now looks like cardboard, and the cattle wouldn't eat that. So we've got to take that out of the equation, as well as those pasture species that the stock aren't going to eat. We had a guess while we were in the paddock and estimated that 20% of the pasture yield was unpalatable. And the other thing we did was look at detachment. There were quite a few annual grasses in that situation. Normally we'd estimate that about 15% of the pasture would become detached. In other words, it falls off or it's going to get trampled by grazing stock. So 15% is a rule of thumb, but this time there's a few more annuals in the pasture, so we might bump that up to 18% is going to fall off and be trampled. So now we take our 3,000 kilos, take out the unpalatable, take out the detachment, and we'll end up with an available pasture figure. So I'll do those calculations now. So the amount of unpalatable is 20% of our 3,000 kilograms that the stock won't eat. We need to take that out. And detachment is 18% of our 3,000 kilograms is going to fall off or be trampled. And I'll put in here kilograms per hectare. So what's left is our 3,000 minus 600 minus 540, and that comes to 1,860 kilograms of pasture per hectare is available for stock to eat. What that's done is calculated the feed available. We now know that there's probably closer to half of the feed we can see in the paddock are actually available for the stock to eat. Now we need to know how much feed are stock going to need to take out of that paddock. How much are they actually going to eat? So the number of AEs in that paddock was in fact 50. As we said earlier in the day, we know that an adult equivalent eats around about 10 kilograms per head per day. That can be affected by time of year, and particularly by quality of pasture and whether you're feeding a supplement. But for the sake of a simple forage budget, we're going to work on 10 kilograms per head per day. So in working out how much feed is actually eaten, we take our adult equivalents, which is 50, multiply that by 10 kilograms per head per day that they're going to eat, and then we multiply by the number of days they're going to be in the paddock, and we divide all of that by 200. Now luckily for me, these calculations can be pretty simply done. Cross out this, and the answer is 500 kilograms per hectare is going to be eaten from the paddock. So the next thing we need to work out is how much is that as a percent of the pasture available to cattle to graze. So if we take our 500 kilograms per hectare and divide it by 1,860, it comes to 27%. Now the reason that's important is because if more than 30% of the pasture is being eaten out of the paddock, that means that diet quality of the grazing stock is going to be compromised. They're actually going to have to be fed a supplement, and a good supplement, to maintain weight or gain weight during that period. So if the stock are eating more than 30% of the pasture in the paddock, they're starting to eat the stem and the poorer quality components of the pasture, and their live weight gains are going to be compromised. So in this case, they're only eating 27% of the palatable and available pasture in the paddock, so their diet quality should be pretty reasonable. Probably still have to feed a supplement in the winter, but at least it's not going to be as bad as eating 40 or 50% of the available pasture. The next thing we calculate is how much is left at the end of the grazing period. So it's 1,860 kilos less 500 kilos per hectare, and the answer is 1,360 kilograms per hectare of pasture left at the end of the grazing period. Now a minimum is 1,000 kilograms per hectare. We need to have a residual of at least 1,000 kilograms per hectare so that we've got plenty of cover for those early summer storms or those spring storms that come through, and we don't lose our most important resource, which is the soil. So when we're estimating pasture yield in the paddock, if the paddock is uniform like a Mitchell grass paddock often is, then it's pretty simple. The yield that you come up with applies to the whole paddock. Most paddocks have variable yields in their pastures though, and we have an example here of a paddock that has a creek running through it, and the area close to the creek has been grazed more heavily than the areas on either side. There's also an area over here that's a jump up and the cattle don't go to. So all those things are going to have an influence on the average yield of that paddock, and we use a formula called the average accessible yield calculator to work that out. It's pretty simple and it goes like this. So say this area of the paddock that's more heavily grazed is 20% of the paddock, and the yield there is actually 1,000 kilograms per hectare. So we multiply 1,000 by 20%, and that gives us 200 kilograms per hectare. This part of the paddock is actually 10% of the paddock, and the yield up there is zero because cattle can't access that part of the paddock. So 10% by zero equals 0 kilograms per hectare. The remainder of the paddock comes to 70%, and the yield in the remainder of the paddock is 3,000 kilograms per hectare. So when we multiply that out, we get 2,100 kilograms per hectare. Now all we have to do is add all these figures together, and that gives us the average accessible yield for the whole paddock, 2,300 kilograms per hectare. That's quite a different figure to the one we started with. 2,300 compared to our initial estimate for the whole paddock of 3,000 kilograms per hectare. So if we actually stocked it to our initial estimate, then we would have been running out of feed by the end of the grazing period.
There are various tools to help calculate your own forage budget. Stocktake and grazing land management spreadsheets have been developed for Northern Australian conditions. These are available as software packages through training courses and increasingly online and as smartphone apps. Online fact sheets and downloads are available from sites such as Meat and Livestock Australia and Future Beef. You now have the understanding and tools to start forage budgeting in your own paddocks. Estimate the available forage in your paddocks, the feed demand for your livestock, and match the two through calculations. These calculations can be done on paper, in a spreadsheet, or specialised software such as Stocktake. More information is available from the Future Beef website or from your local beef extension officer.